My name is Callie Thompson, and at 67 years old, I never expected to uncover the ultimate betrayal after 45 years of marriage. When I discovered the text messages between my husband Harold and my daughter-in-law Amanda, something inside me broke and rebuilt differently. They had no idea I knew about their affair just days before our divorce appointment. While they thought I was clueless, I was methodically gathering evidence that would change everything. If you are watching this video, tell me where you are from in the comments, hit like and subscribe, and prepare yourself for a story about the day I finally stood up for myself. I spent the majority of my adult life as a successful real estate agent in Boston, building a reputation for honesty and determination in a cutthroat market. My husband Harold was a corporate lawyer with one of the most prestigious firms in the city. We lived in a beautiful colonial home in Brookline that I had lovingly restored over the decades. By all appearances, we were the perfect couple with the perfect life. Our only son, James, was the light of our lives from the moment he was born. We raised him with every advantage we could provide, and he grew into a kind, intelligent man who made us both proud. He followed in his father's footsteps and became an attorney, though he chose to work for a non-profit organization providing legal assistance to low-income families. Harold never quite approved of James turning down lucrative offers from major firms, but I admired his dedication to helping others. 5 years ago, James met Amanda during a charity fundraiser. She was strikingly beautiful with her auburn hair and green eyes, working in pharmaceutical sales and clearly ambitious. I remember the day he brought her home to meet us. Harold was immediately charmed by her, perhaps a bit too charmed in hindsight. She complimented our home, asked Harold intelligent questions about his legal career, and seemed to fit perfectly into our family. Their wedding was lavish, partly funded by us as our gift, and I threw myself into helping with the planning. Amanda and I spent hours selecting flower arrangements, tasting cakes, and discussing every detail. I genuinely believed we were forming a mother-daughter bond, and I was thrilled when James had found someone who seemed so perfect for him. After 4 decades of working non-stop, Harold and I had finally reached retirement age. We had substantial savings, investment properties, and a comfortable pension. Our plan had always been to travel extensively, perhaps buy a small place in France where we could spend summers. Harold had talked about these plans for years, but once retirement actually arrived, he seemed restless and irritable. The first signs were subtle. Harold started spending more time at his home office, claiming he was consulting on cases for his old firm. He joined a new country club without discussing it with me first. His phone became something he guarded closely. At the time, I attributed his behavior to the difficult adjustment to retirement. Many of my friends had mentioned how their husbands struggled with the loss of identity after leaving their careers. Our family would gather for Sunday dinners almost every week. James and Amanda would come over, and we would enjoy a traditional meal together. These dinners were important to me, a way to maintain our connection as a family. As months passed, I noticed subtle changes in the dynamics around our table. Harold would direct most of his attention to Amanda, asking about her work and laughing at her jokes. James would sometimes look confused at their animated conversations, as if wondering when his wife and father had developed such a close relationship. During one particularly memorable Thanksgiving dinner about 2 years ago, Harold insisted on sitting next to Amanda, instead of in his usual place at the head of the table. I remember the strange look James gave me as Harold refilled Amanda's wine glass for the 3rd time, his hand lingering on her shoulder. That night, after everyone had left, I casually mentioned to Harold that he seemed very attentive to Amanda. He dismissed my observation with a wave of his hand, saying, "She is intelligent and ambitious. James is lucky to have found her." Around this time, I began noticing other changes in Harold. He lost 20 pounds, bought an entirely new wardrobe, and started using expensive cologne. When I complimented him on his efforts to get in shape, he simply said he wanted to make the most of his retirement years. I actually felt guilty for harboring any suspicions about my husband of over 4 decades. Meanwhile, James and Amanda began having troubles in their marriage. Amanda would call me sometimes in tears, talking about how James worked too much and didn't understand her needs. I tried to be supportive, offering advice from my years of experience, truly believing I was helping them through a rough patch. How naive I was. James just doesn't understand the pressure I am under at work, Amanda told me during one of our lunch dates. Sometimes I wonder if we rushed into marriage. Being the supportive mother-in-law I thought I needed to be, I reassured her. Every marriage has its difficulties, dear. Communication is key. Have you tried talking to him about how you feel? When I mentioned these conversations to Harold, he seemed unusually interested. He would ask detailed questions about Amanda's complaints and offer to speak with James on her behalf. At the time, I thought he was being a concerned father. Now I recognize he was gathering information for his own purposes. Maybe I should talk to Amanda directly, Harold suggested one evening. Sometimes it helps to have an objective perspective from someone who understands the pressures of a demanding career. I encouraged this, believing my husband was trying to help save our son's marriage. The terrible irony is not lost on me now. During the following months, Harold began attending legal conferences again, claiming he missed the intellectual stimulation. He would be gone for weekends at a time. Simultaneously, Amanda began mentioning business trips that frequently seemed to align with Harold's absences. James appeared increasingly withdrawn at our family gatherings, often checking his watch and making excuses to leave early. One afternoon, Amanda called me in tears, saying she and James had a huge fight and she needed someone to talk to. I invited her over, not realizing Harold had canceled his golf game and was at home. When she arrived, Harold suggested I go pick up some pastries from our favorite bakery to cheer her up. When I returned 30 minutes later, they were sitting unusually close on the sofa but sprang apart when I entered. The conversation seemed strained for the remainder of the visit, and Amanda left soon after. That night, I asked Harold what they had discussed while I was gone. Nothing important, he said dismissively. She is just feeling unappreciated. James works too hard, just like I did at his age. I nodded, but something about his tone left me feeling unsettled. That was the first moment I remember thinking something was truly wrong beyond the typical stresses of marriage and retirement. Little did I know that my entire world was about to unravel in ways I could never have imagined. The moment everything changed came on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Harold had forgotten his phone on the nightstand when he left for his weekly golf game. The device buzzed repeatedly with incoming messages, which was unusual. Concerned it might be an emergency, I glanced at the screen. What I saw froze the blood in my veins. Multiple notifications from A with preview text that made my stomach turn. Last night was amazing. I can't wait until next. And when can we meet again? James is going to Chicago on. My hands trembled as I picked up the phone. Harold never had a passcode, one of the things I had always appreciated about our relationship. We had nothing to hide from each other, or so I thought. I opened the messages and began scrolling through a conversation that spanned months, maybe longer. The texts between Harold and Amanda detailed meetups at hotels at our vacation home on the Cape, and even in our house when I was visiting my sister in New Hampshire. They exchanged explicit photos that seared into my brain. They discussed their future together, how they would break the news to James and me once they figured out how to minimize the financial impact. Callie will never fight me, on the divorce Harold had written. She has no idea about our finances and will take whatever settlement I offer. Amanda had replied, James will be devastated, but he will move on. He is so focused on his career anyway. As I read through their messages, I realized they had been carrying on this affair for at least 8 months. Every business trip, every late night at the office, every golf game could have been a lie. The betrayal was staggering, but what hurt even more was how they discussed James and me as afterthoughts, obstacles to be managed. I sat on the edge of the bed for hours, alternating between sobbing and a cold, calculating anger I had never experienced before. When I heard Harold's car in the driveway, I quickly returned his phone to the nightstand and went to the bathroom to splash cold water on my face. That night, I watched Harold across the dinner table, this stranger I had shared my life with, and made a decision. I would not confront him immediately. I would not give him the opportunity to hide assets, fabricate explanations, or turn our son against me. I would gather evidence, protect myself, and when the time was right, I would act. The next day, I purchased small security cameras online and installed them in our living room and Harold's home office. I told myself this was an invasion of privacy, something I never thought I would do, but self-preservation had become my priority. The first footage I captured confirmed my worst fears. Harold invited Amanda over while I was at my weekly book club. They did not even make it upstairs to the bedroom. Over the following weeks, I documented everything. I photographed credit card statements, showing hotel charges on days Harold claimed to be golfing. I saved receipts for expensive gifts like jewelry and designer clothing items I had never received. I recorded Harold's phone calls when he thought I was out of the house, capturing conversations about their future plans and how they would handle the divorces. The evidence suggested they had been meeting at our Cape Cod vacation home regularly. I drove there unannounced one weekend when Harold said he was attending a legal conference in New York. Both their cars were in the driveway. I did not confront them, instead taking photos and driving back to Boston with tears streaming down my face. During this period, I maintained a facade of normalcy, preparing Harold's favorite meals, asking about his day, and pretending I remained the oblivious wife he thought I was. Every smile felt like a betrayal to myself. But I knew gathering evidence was more important than the momentary satisfaction of confrontation. Meanwhile, James began calling me more frequently, expressing concerns about his marriage. "Mom, something is not right with Amanda. She is distant, always on her phone, and makes excuses to avoid spending time with me." My heart broke for my son, knowing what I knew but unable to tell him yet. "Marriage takes work, James. Have you tried talking to her about how you feel?" Even as the words left my mouth, I hated myself for the deception. As weeks turned into months, I discovered more than just the affair. Harold had created separate bank accounts I knew nothing about. He had been transferring substantial sums from our joint investment accounts into these private holdings. I found documentation of an offshore account in the Cayman Islands with over $2 million money that had been quietly moved over several years. The deeper I dug, the more I realized Harold had been planning an exit strategy for longer than the affair had been going on. This was not just about Amanda. This was about a man who wanted to start a new life without the financial obligations of the old one. Amanda continued her manipulation, calling me for advice about her troubled marriage, all while sleeping with my husband. During one particularly painful lunch, she tearfully confided that she was considering divorce. "James just does not understand me like some people do," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. "I feel like I married the wrong person." I reached across the table and took her hand, maintaining my role as the caring mother-in-law. "Every marriage has its challenges, Amanda. Are you certain you have tried everything to make it work?" She looked at me with an expression I now recognize as guilt mixed with calculation. "Some connections are undeniable, Callie. When you feel it, you just know." That night, I found Harold deleting text messages on his phone. When I asked casually what he was doing, he startled and said he was just clearing storage space. The lies had become so routine for him that they slipped out effortlessly. The final confirmation came when I hired a private investigator to follow them for a week. The detailed report included photographs, hotel receipts, and timestamps of their meetings. The investigator also uncovered something I had not known. Harold had purchased an apartment in Back Bay under a business entity name, presumably as a future residence for him and Amanda. With all this information weighing on me, I knew I needed professional help. It was time to consult with a divorce attorney, but I had to ensure Harold would not find out. My entire strategy depended on the element of surprise. The first attorney I contacted was a partner at a competing firm to Harold's. When I explained who my husband was, he politely declined to take my case, citing professional courtesy. The second attorney had a conflict of interest due to previous dealings with Harold's firm. It seemed my husband's professional network was making it difficult to find representation. Then a friend recommended Barbara Williams, a formidable divorce attorney, known for handling high-profile cases with discretion and fierce advocacy. Barbara's office was in a converted brownstone in downtown Boston, intentionally understated but exuding quiet confidence. When I arrived for our consultation, I brought a small selection of the evidence I had gathered. After reviewing the materials for 20 minutes in silence, Barbara looked up at me with determined eyes. Mrs. Thompson, based on what you have shown me, your husband has been systematically preparing for a divorce while attempting to hide assets. This is not just morally reprehensible, but potentially illegal. Massachusetts is an equitable distribution state, which means the court will divide marital assets fairly, though not necessarily equally. The fact that he has been having an affair with your daughter-in-law and hiding money will significantly impact how a judge views this case. She outlined a strategy that began with documenting every asset we owned. Do you have access to all financial statements, tax returns, property deeds, retirement accounts? I had to admit that while I knew about our main accounts, Harold had handled most of our financial matters throughout our marriage. This was common for women of my generation, a fact I now deeply regretted. That ends today, Barbara said firmly. Your homework is to gather every financial document you can access without raising suspicion. We need to create a complete picture of your marital estate before he realizes you are preparing for divorce. Over the next several weeks, I became a financial detective in my own home. I systematically went through Harold's office when he was out photographing documents and making copies. I wrote down account numbers, passwords I discovered, and details of investments I had never known existed. I learned we were significantly wealthier than I had realized, with real estate holdings in 3 states and substantial stock portfolios. Barbara advised me to create my own financial identity immediately. I opened a separate bank account at a different bank than the one Harold and I used. I began transferring small amounts from our joint checking account to this new account, keeping careful records of each transaction. I updated my will and changed the beneficiaries on my life insurance policy from Harold to James. One critical piece of advice Barbara gave me was to secure my personal belongings and family heirlooms. Once divorce proceedings begin, the court will likely issue an automatic temporary restraining order, preventing either party from disposing of marital assets. However, items with sentimental value should be protected now. I spent one afternoon while Harold was playing golf carefully packing my grandmother's jewelry, family photographs, and personal mementos. I stored these treasures in a safe deposit box only I could access. The wedding rings from my parents' marriage, the silver baby cup that had been James's letters my father had written to my mother during the war, all safely removed from Harold's reach. Massachusetts law treats adultery seriously in divorce proceedings. While it is not necessarily a financial game changer, documented evidence of infidelity can influence a judge's decisions about asset division, especially when combined with evidence of financial misconduct. Barbara explained that my methodical gathering of evidence would serve me well. Your husband has made a critical mistake, she said during one of our meetings. He has not only committed adultery, but has been hiding marital assets. This combination gives us significant leverage. During my investigation, I discovered something that shocked even Barbara. Harold had been using our joint assets to make investments through a shell company, taking substantial risks with our retirement funds without my knowledge or consent. Some of these investments appeared to skirt ethical boundaries in ways that could potentially impact his standing with the Bar Association. I also uncovered that Harold had been quietly liquidating some of our joint investments and transferring the funds to accounts I could not access. Barbara immediately filed for an emergency injunction to freeze these accounts once we were ready to proceed. The most painful discovery came when I visited our longtime banker, Thomas, whom I had known for 20 years. When I asked specific questions about certain accounts, his discomfort was palpable. "Callie, I am not supposed to discuss this with you," he said quietly, "but as someone who considers you a friend, I cannot in good conscience remain silent. Harold came in 6 months ago and removed your name from several of the larger investment accounts. He claimed it was for tax purposes, and that you were aware of the changes." The betrayal cut deep. Thomas had attended our anniversary parties, had known us as a couple for decades. Yet he had facilitated Harold's financial deception without verifying my consent. I thanked him for his honesty, and Barbara later used this information to support our case, that Harold had been systematically preparing to leave the marriage while minimizing my financial claim. Throughout this period, I developed a meticulous documentation system. Every conversation, every discovery, every bank statement was categorized and stored securely in the cloud with copies in Barbara's office. I kept a daily journal detailing Harold's comings and goings, his explanations for absences, and any unusual financial activities. This journal would later prove invaluable in establishing patterns of deception. The emotional toll of living this double life was enormous. I would smile at Harold over breakfast while knowing he had been with Amanda the previous day. I would ask about his golf game when the GPS tracker I had placed in his car showed he had been nowhere near the country club. Each night I would lie awake beside him, wondering how 45 years of marriage could end in such betrayal. My lifelong friends became my support system, though I shared the full truth with only two of them. Susan and Margaret had been in my life since college, and their unwavering support kept me functioning. We would meet for lunch weekly, and those few hours of authentic conversation restored my strength for the performance I had to maintain at home. "You are stronger than you know, Callie," Susan told me during one particularly difficult day. "And when this is over, we will help you rebuild." As weeks passed, I methodically prepared for financial independence. I researched housing options, considering whether to fight for our marital home or start fresh elsewhere. I updated my resume, thinking I might return to real estate part-time to keep myself occupied after the divorce. I began quietly moving my personal items to a storage unit, preparing for the inevitability of separation. Barbara and I established a secure communication system using an email account Harold knew nothing about and a prepaid phone for urgent matters. We scheduled our meetings during times I normally had standing appointments for hair or volunteer work, maintaining my routine while secretly preparing for battle. By the time I was ready to confront Harold, I had accumulated more evidence than most divorce attorneys see in their entire careers. I had documented financial malfeasance, clear evidence of the affair, and a comprehensive understanding of our marital assets. What Harold had intended to be my weakness, my supposed ignorance of our finances, had become my greatest strength. I knew more about his financial activities than he realized was possible. The final piece of preparation came when Barbara connected me with a forensic accountant who specialized in high-conflict divorces. He reviewed the financial documentation I had gathered and identified several areas where Harold had potentially violated not just marital duties but professional ethics and possibly the law. This information would prove crucial in the confrontation to come. After 3 months of silent preparation, I was ready. The woman who had once been content to let her husband handle the finances, who had believed in the sanctity of her 45-year marriage, was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone who understood her worth and was prepared to fight for what was rightfully hers. I chose a Sunday evening for the initial confrontation. James was out of town on a business trip, which was intentional on my part. I wanted to face Harold alone without our son potentially being caught in the crossfire. I prepared a simple dinner, poured myself a glass of wine for courage, and waited for Harold to return from his alleged meeting with a former colleague. When he walked in, I was sitting calmly at the dining room table with printed copies of text messages between him and Amanda arranged neatly beside my plate. His face registered confusion, then shock, then a calculated blankness as he assessed the situation. "What is all this?" he asked, his voice steady but with an edge of wariness. "I think you know exactly what it is, Harold," I replied, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. "I know about you and Amanda. I have known for months." He stood frozen for a moment, before his lawyer instincts kicked in. "These could be taken out of context. You do not understand the situation." I slid another stack of papers toward him. "Do I also misunderstand the apartment you purchased in Back Bay, or the $2 million in the Cayman Islands, or the fact that you removed my name from our investment accounts without my knowledge?" The color drained from his face as he realized how thorough my investigation had been. He sat heavily in the chair across from me. "How did you find out about all of this?" he finally asked. "That is irrelevant. What matters is that I know everything, Harold. Every lie, every secret account, every afternoon you spent with our son's wife while I thought you were playing golf." His expression shifted from shock to anger. "You had no right to spy on me. And you had no right to betray our 45-year marriage or to try to steal what we built together, I countered. I am filing for divorce. Harold's anger escalated quickly. You will get nothing. Do you understand I have controlled our finances for decades? You cannot prove half of what you think you know, and no judge will take the word of a housewife over a respected attorney with 40 years of experience. I am hardly just a housewife, Harold. I contributed to our success every step of the way, from supporting your career to raising our son to building my own real estate business. And I have more evidence than you can imagine. His dismissive laugh cut through me. Evidence gathered illegally would not be admissible, Callie. You should know that. And without my financial support, you cannot afford a lawyer who could match mine. I allowed myself a small smile. I already have a lawyer. Barbara Williams. Perhaps you have heard of her. The mention of Barbara's name had the intended effect. Harold knew her reputation for being ruthless in high-profile divorces. For the first time, uncertainty flashed across his face. This is unnecessary, he said, his tone softening into the persuasive voice he used in court. We can work this out between ourselves. There is no need to involve lawyers and drag our private business through the courts. That opportunity passed the moment you began transferring our assets without my knowledge, I replied. You can expect formal papers this week. I suggest you find yourself somewhere else to stay tonight. Harold's facade crumbled. Where am I supposed to go? Perhaps your apartment in Back Bay, or Amanda's place, since I imagine James is out of town on business. The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. Harold gathered his keys and wallet, then paused at the door. You have no idea what you are doing, Callie. When this is over, you will regret it. After he left, I allowed myself to cry for the first time since the confrontation began. Not for the marriage I had lost, which had clearly been an illusion for longer than I knew, but for the relief of finally standing up for myself. The next morning, Barbara filed the divorce petition on my behalf. Harold was served with papers at his office, a public humiliation he had not anticipated. By that evening, he had retained Gregory Powell, an aggressive divorce attorney known for scorched earth tactics. The days that followed were tense. Harold moved into a hotel, refusing to use the Back Bay apartment now that I knew about it. He called repeatedly, alternating between threats and attempts at reconciliation. I maintained minimal contact, directing all substantive communication through Barbara. Then came the conversation I had been dreading. James returned from his business trip and came directly to the house, his face ashen. Dad told me you are divorcing him. He said you have been acting erratically, making wild accusations. Mom, what is happening? The moment had come. I sat my son down and gently explained what I had discovered, showing him selected evidence of the affair, but sparing him the most painful details. As understanding dawned on him, James's expression transformed from confusion to horror to rage. Amanda. My father and my wife. His voice broke on the words. How long have you known? About 3 months, I admitted. I wanted to tell you immediately, but I needed to protect our financial interests first. Your father has been hiding assets, James. I had to gather evidence before confronting him. James paced the living room, running his hands through his hair in a gesture so reminiscent of his father that it made my heart ache. I need to talk to Amanda. Are you sure that is wise right now? I asked, concerned about his emotional state. I need to hear her admit it, he said firmly. The confrontation between James and Amanda happened at their apartment that evening. James later told me that Amanda initially denied everything, claiming I was making up stories because I was jealous of their relationship. When James produced the evidence I had given him, her denial crumbled into tears. It just happened, she sobbed. We never meant to hurt anyone. Harold understands me in ways you never could. James returned to my house late that night, shattered but resolute. I am filing for divorce too, he said quietly. I cannot believe they did this to us. In the days that followed, Harold attempted to turn James against me, suggesting that I had manufactured evidence out of jealousy and resentment. James saw through the manipulation and stood firmly by my side, a united front against the two people who had betrayed us most deeply. Harold's next move was to file counterclaims, alleging that I had been financially irresponsible and emotionally unstable. His lawyer sent a proposed settlement that would have left me with a fraction of our marital assets, claiming that Harold's superior earning capacity entitled him to the lion's share of our wealth. Barbara responded with a comprehensive breakdown of our marital assets, including the accounts Harold had attempted to hide and a clear statement of my entitlement to an equitable share. She also indicated our willingness to disclose Harold's professional misconduct to the Bar Association if necessary. The week before our scheduled meeting with both attorneys, I received a text from Amanda. "Can we talk, please? There are things you do not understand." I declined the meeting, forwarding the message to Barbara per our agreement about all communication related to the divorce. That same evening, I drove past our vacation home on a hunch and saw both Harold's and Amanda's cars in the driveway. Even now, with both divorces in process, they were continuing their affair. I took photographs from my car and sent them to Barbara, then sat for a long time watching the house where I had spent so many summer weekends over the decades. The lights were on in the master bedroom, our bedroom. Something final settled in me at that moment. Any lingering emotional attachment to Harold dissolved completely. I was ready for whatever came next. The day of our settlement meeting arrived with a crystalline autumn clarity that seemed at odds with the emotional turmoil of the occasion. I dressed carefully in a navy blue suit I had purchased, specifically for this meeting professional but not flashy. Barbara had advised me to project confidence and dignity regardless of what transpired. Harold's attorney, Gregory Powell, had insisted on hosting the meeting at his firm's impressive offices in a downtown skyscraper. The power play was obvious from the intimidating security desk in the marble lobby to the oversized conference room with views overlooking Boston Harbor. Barbara and I arrived 15 minutes early as planned. She wore a perfectly tailored red suit that conveyed exactly the message we wanted. We were not intimidated. We used the time to review our strategy one last time. "Remember," Barbara said quietly, "Harold expects you to be emotional and easily manipulated. Your calm demeanor will unsettle him. No matter what is said, maintain your composure." When Harold arrived, he was not alone. Amanda walked in beside him, her hand possessively on his arm. This was unexpected and clearly calculated to throw me off balance. Barbara's slight squeeze of my hand under the table told me she was equally surprised but determined not to show it. Gregory Powell entered last, a tall man with silver hair and an expensive suit, flanked by a younger associate carrying multiple folders. The power dynamic they attempted to establish was clear. They were the professionals. I was merely the discarded wife. Mrs. Thompson Powell began with a condescending smile. "I appreciate your willingness to meet today. I believe we can resolve this matter efficiently if everyone remains reasonable." Barbara interjected smoothly, "Miss Williams, please. I represent Mrs. Thompson, and all communication should go through me." Powell's smile tightened slightly. "Of course, Miss Williams. Let me outline our position." What followed was a presentation clearly designed to intimidate. Powell detailed Harold's significant contributions to our marital wealth, his professional standing, and his continued earning potential even in semi-retirement. He minimized my contributions as supportive but not substantial, and suggested that a generous settlement would include the house in Brookline and a modest alimony for 5 years. Throughout his presentation, Harold maintained a smug expression while Amanda gazed at him adoringly. The performance was so transparent, it would have been comical if it were not my life being dismantled. When Powell finally concluded, Barbara calmly opened her portfolio. "Before we respond to your proposal, I have a few questions about certain assets that appear to be missing from your accounting." She began methodically listing accounts and properties that had been omitted from Powell's presentation. With each item, Harold's expression grew more strained. Amanda looked increasingly confused. "Additionally," Barbara continued, "we have concerns about certain financial transactions that occurred in the months preceding our client's divorce filing. Specifically, the transfer of joint assets to accounts in the Cayman Islands, the purchase of real estate through shell companies, and the removal of Mrs. Thompson's name from multiple investment accounts without her knowledge or consent." Powell glanced at Harold, clearly surprised by some of these revelations. My client has maintained separate property throughout the marriage, which he is entitled to manage as he sees fit. Interesting perspective, Barbara replied, but Massachusetts law is quite clear about marital property, especially when one party attempts to hide assets prior to divorce proceedings. The tension in the room escalated as Barbara systematically dismantled their position. Then Powell played what he clearly thought was his trump card. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, addressing me directly, "despite Barbara's earlier correction, you need to understand that you have no right to many of these assets. The business entities and investment vehicles were created and managed solely by Mr. Thompson. Your name does not appear on most of the documentation. Legally, you cannot claim what you cannot prove existed." A heavy silence fell over the room. Harold was actually smiling now, confident in his perceived victory. Amanda looked relieved, as though the worst was over. Powell sat back in his chair, awaiting our capitulation. I smiled serenely and reached for my purse, a large, structured handbag I had chosen specifically for this meeting. "You know, Mr. Powell, my husband always underestimated me. He assumed that because I trusted him with our finances, I was ignorant. That was his first mistake." I began removing items from my purse and placing them on the conference table. First, a flash drive. This contains copies of every financial document related to our marriage for the past 10 years, including accounts my husband believed I knew nothing about. Next, a small recorder. This has a recording of my conversation with our banker, Thomas Wilson, in which he admits that Harold removed my name from our joint accounts without my knowledge or consent, a clear violation of fiduciary duty in a marriage. I placed a folder of photographs on the table. These document Harold's affair with our daughter-in-law, including meetings at our vacation home, while both divorces were already in process. Finally, I produced a thick binder, and this contains evidence of questionable financial transactions Harold conducted through our joint assets, including investments that skirt ethical boundaries for a practicing attorney. The Bar Association would find it fascinating reading. The room had gone completely still. Harold's face had drained of all color. Amanda was staring at the materials on the table with her mouth slightly open. Even Powell appeared momentarily at a loss for words. Barbara took over seamlessly. "As you can see, gentlemen, our position is considerably stronger than you assumed. Mrs. Thompson is entitled to an equitable distribution of all marital assets, including those Mr. Thompson attempted to conceal. Furthermore, given the circumstances of the marriage's dissolution and Mr. Thompson's clear attempts at financial deception, we believe a judge would be quite sympathetic to our requests for additional considerations." Harold suddenly found his voice, though it shook slightly. "You had no right to access my private accounts. Those recordings could be illegal." I met his gaze steadily. "Every bit of evidence was obtained legally, Harold. Barbara made certain of that. And unlike you, I have nothing to hide." Powell, recognizing the shifting leverage, attempted damage control. "Perhaps we should take a short recess to review these materials." "By all means," Barbara agreed smoothly. "We will wait." Harold Powell and the associate stepped outside, leaving Amanda and me alone in the conference room. She would not meet my eyes. "Did you know," I asked her quietly, "about the hidden accounts, the money he was moving?" She shook her head slightly. "Not everything. He told me we would be comfortable that he had been planning for the future." "And did you consider what you were doing to James to me?" Amanda finally looked up, tears in her eyes. "It just happened, Callie. We did not mean for anyone to get hurt. Affairs do not just happen, Amanda. They are choices made repeatedly, day after day, and people always get hurt." Before she could respond, the men returned to the room. Powell's demeanor had changed dramatically. Gone was the condescending smile, replaced by a tightly controlled professional mask. "In light of this new information, we would like to propose an alternative settlement structure," he said, sliding a notepad toward Barbara. The figures written there represented a dramatic shift from their initial offer. Harold was now willing to concede the house, the vacation property, half of all investment accounts, including those he had hidden, and substantial alimony. In exchange, he wanted my silence regarding his professional conduct. Barbara reviewed the numbers and passed the notepad to me. "This is merely a starting point for negotiations," she said. We will need to verify all assets before agreeing to any settlement. Harold suddenly spoke up, his voice tight. Callie, can we speak privately, please? I looked at my husband of 45 years, the father of my child, the man who had shared my bed and my life, now a stranger willing to discard decades of history for a younger woman and hidden bank accounts. No, Harold. There is nothing left to say between us privately. Everything will go through our attorneys from now on. The meeting concluded with an agreement to reconvene after a complete accounting of assets had been conducted by an independent third party. As we gathered our materials to leave, I heard Amanda whisper to Harold, "What does this mean for us?" His response was too low to hear, but the look on his face told me everything had changed. Walking out of that conference room with Barbara beside me, carrying the evidence of my meticulous preparation, I felt a weight lifting. The confrontation I had feared for months had come and gone, and I had emerged stronger than I had entered. The road ahead would still be difficult, but for the first time since discovering Harold's betrayal, I felt confident about my future. The ripple effects from our settlement meeting spread quickly. By the next morning, Harold was calling repeatedly, leaving voicemails that ranged from apologetic to threatening. I maintained my silence, allowing Barbara to handle all communication as we had agreed. 3 days after our meeting, I received an unexpected visit from James. He looked exhausted with dark circles under his eyes, and a weariness that seemed to have aged him years in just weeks. I met with Amanda and her lawyer yesterday, he said, as I poured him coffee at the kitchen table where he had eaten countless meals growing up. She is asking for half of everything, including my inheritance from Grandma. What did your attorney advise? I asked, sitting beside him. He says her case is weak, especially given the infidelity. But he also says fighting could drag this out for years. He looked up at me, his father's blue eyes clouded with pain. I just want it over, Mom. I want to move on with my life. I squeezed his hand. Then find a settlement you can live with and end it. Money can be replaced. Your peace of mind is worth more. The revised divorce settlement from Harold arrived the following week. It was substantially more favorable than anything I could have expected before our confrontation. I would keep the Brookline house and the vacation home on Cape Cod. We would split all investment accounts equally, including those previously hidden. I would receive alimony that ensured my financial stability for the rest of my life. In exchange, I agreed not to disclose Harold's potentially unethical financial dealings to the Bar Association, provided all terms of the settlement were met in full. Barbara reviewed the document line by line with me. This is a good settlement, Callie. Better than most I have seen in similar circumstances. You could potentially get more if we went to trial, but that would mean months or years of legal battles. I do not want to spend the next chapter of my life fighting Harold in court, I told her. I want this finished so I can move forward. I signed the agreement feeling a complex mixture of emotions. There was relief that the financial aspect was resolved, favorably sadness for the end of what I had once believed was a good marriage, and a surprising sense of pride in my own resilience. Harold signed the papers 2 days later. Our 45-year marriage was dissolved with surprising efficiency once the terms were agreed upon. I did not see him at the final hearing. Our attorneys handled everything. The professional consequences for Harold were significant, despite my agreement not to report him to the Bar Association. Word of his affair with his son's wife and his attempts to hide marital assets spread through Boston's legal community. Several partners at his former firm, concerned about potential liability, initiated a review of his past cases. While he avoided disbarment, his reputation was irreparably damaged. Amanda's divorce from James proceeded with less drama but equal finality. She received a settlement that James described as generous, considering the circumstances, and moved to Chicago shortly afterward. I later heard she had taken a job with a pharmaceutical company there, starting fresh, where her history was unknown. The most painful aspect of the aftermath was watching James struggle to rebuild his trust in relationships. He threw himself into his work at the legal aid organization, taking on more cases than ever before. When I expressed concern about his long hours, he shrugged it off. Work makes sense, Mom. People need help, I provide it. It is straightforward, unlike relationships. I encouraged him to see a therapist, and after initial resistance, he agreed. The weekly sessions seemed to help him process the betrayal by the two people who should have been most loyal to him. Throughout this period, Harold made multiple attempts to reconcile or, at least, improve our relationship. He sent flowers that I donated to a nursing home. He left messages expressing regret that I deleted without listening to fully. Once he appeared unannounced at the house looking haggard and much older than his 72 years. "I made a terrible mistake, Callie," he said when I reluctantly opened the door. "I threw away everything that mattered for nothing." "Not nothing, Harold," I corrected him. "For Amanda, for excitement, for the feeling of being young again. You made your choices with open eyes just as I am making mine now. Goodbye." I closed the door on my past and focused on creating a future I had never anticipated. At 67, I was single for the first time since college, financially secure but emotionally adrift. The habits of a lifetime deferring to Harold's preferences, considering his schedule and needs, were hard to break. My friends proved invaluable during this transition. Susan and Margaret, who had supported me through the investigation and divorce, now encouraged me to rediscover myself. They invited me to travel, introduced me to new social circles, and gently pushed me out of my comfort zone. "You always wanted to see Paris," Susan reminded me over lunch one day. "Harold always had an excuse why it was not the right time. There is nothing stopping you now." 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I booked a trip to Europe, something Harold had promised for decades but never prioritized. I spent 2 weeks exploring Paris, Florence, and Barcelona, staying in beautiful hotels, visiting museums at my own pace, and dining wherever and whenever I pleased. The freedom was both terrifying and exhilarating. Upon returning home, I decided the house in Brookline held too many memories of my old life. Rather than selling it immediately, I hired a decorator and contractor to completely transform the space. Walls came down, dark wood paneling was replaced with light colors, and Harold's imposing home office became a sunlit art studio where I could pursue the painting I had abandoned decades earlier. James was initially surprised by my decision to renovate rather than move. "Are you sure you want to stay there, Mom? There must be so many difficult memories." "The house itself is not to blame for what happened within it," I explained. "By changing it, I am reclaiming it as my own. And besides, this is where you grew up. I do not want to lose that connection." Rebuilding my relationship with James became a priority. The dual betrayal by his father and wife had created a bond between us, but also a shared trauma that needed healing. We established a new tradition of Sunday dinners, just the two of us creating new memories to replace the painful ones of our previous family gatherings. During one such dinner about 6 months after the divorce, James shared news that signaled his own healing had begun. "I met someone," he said cautiously. "A public defender I work with occasionally. We are taking things very slowly." The joy I felt at seeing this glimmer of hope for my son's future brought tears to my eyes. "I am so happy for you, James. You deserve someone who values you completely." As for Harold, reports of his decline came through mutual acquaintances. The financial settlement had forced him to significantly downsize his lifestyle. The Back Bay apartment was sold and he moved to a much smaller condo in a less prestigious neighborhood. Health problems emerged, exacerbated by stress and, according to rumors, increased drinking. Amanda attempted to contact me several times as months passed. Each time, I politely but firmly declined to engage. Whatever justifications or explanations she wanted to offer would not change what had happened. Some betrayals are too profound for conventional forgiveness. Instead of dwelling on the past, I focused on creating a meaningful future. I volunteered at a women's shelter, using my experience to help others navigating difficult transitions. The director, learning of my background in real estate, asked if I would help residents find affordable housing. This evolved into a part-time consulting role that gave me purpose and connection. Through the shelter, I met women whose courage in leaving abusive situations humbled me. Their stories put my own experience into perspective. Yes, I had been betrayed, but I had also had decades of a mostly good marriage and the financial resources to land on my feet. Many of these women had nothing but their determination to build better lives. Their resilience inspired me daily. One volunteer at the shelter, a retired English professor named Eleanor, became a close friend. Our shared love of literature led to joining a book club together, expanding my social circle further. Through Eleanor, I met other divorced and widowed women who understood the complex journey of reinventing oneself in later life. Nearly a year after the divorce, I received an unexpected letter from Harold's doctor. Harold had suffered a minor heart attack and was recovering at Massachusetts General Hospital. The doctor explained that Harold had asked him to contact me as he was not certain I would accept a call directly. After considerable thought, I visited Harold in the hospital. The man in the bed looked diminished, his confident demeanor replaced by a fragile vulnerability. Our conversation was awkward but civil. He apologized again with what seemed like genuine remorse. I accepted his apology without promising a renewed relationship. "I wish you well, Harold," I said as I prepared to leave. "I truly do. But we cannot go back, and I am not interested in being friends. Too much has happened." He nodded, seeming to understand that this brief moment of peace was the most closure either of us would get. As I walked out of his hospital room, I felt the last chains of resentment loosening. I was not forgiving for his sake, but for my own. Carrying anger would only burden my new life. That evening, I sat in my transformed living room, sunlight streaming through windows that once held heavy drapes Harold had insisted upon. A canvas stood on an easel by the window, my first serious painting attempt in years. The subject was a woman standing at a crossroads, looking forward rather than back. As I added touches of gold to the path ahead of her, I realized I was painting my own journey. The betrayal that had seemed like an ending had become unexpectedly a beginning. At almost 70, I was discovering aspects of myself that had been submerged in the identity of wife and mother. The pain remained a shadow that occasionally darkened bright days, but it no longer defined me. The first anniversary of my divorce passed with little fanfare but much reflection. I spent the day alone by choice, walking the Freedom Trail through Boston, appreciating the symbolism of the historic path toward liberty. That evening, I wrote in the journal I had begun keeping, not about Harold or the pain of betrayal, but about my hopes for the year ahead. Grief, I had learned, does not follow a linear path. Some days were still difficult. I would find myself reaching for the phone to tell Harold about something I had read, or setting the dinner table for 2 out of decades of habit. But these moments grew fewer as time passed, replaced by a growing comfort with my solitude and independence. My journey toward healing began in earnest with a 3-week trip to Europe, something Harold had promised for years, but always found reasons to postpone. With no one's preferences to consider but my own, I booked a river cruise from Amsterdam to Budapest. The joy of waking each morning to new vistas of making spontaneous decisions about how to spend each day was intoxicating. On the cruise, I met a group of women from Seattle who were celebrating their 60th birthdays together. Their easy camaraderie reminded me of what I had with Susan and Margaret, but their stories of solo adventures and late-in-life career changes opened my eyes to possibilities I had never considered. I went to law school at 55. One woman named Patricia told me over dinner one evening. My husband thought I was having a midlife crisis. I told him it was more like a midlife awakening. Upon returning home, I looked at my house in Brookline with fresh eyes. For 40 years, it had been our home, decorated to Harold's taste, functioning according to his preferences. Now it would become truly mine. I hired a contractor and began extensive renovations, knocking down walls to create the open, light-filled spaces I had always wanted. Harold's mahogany-paneled office, a room I had rarely entered during our marriage, became my art studio. The formal dining room, where we had hosted countless dinner parties, became a casual gathering space with comfortable seating and bookcases lining the walls. I replaced the heavy draperies Harold had insisted upon with simple blinds that let in the morning sunlight. Each change to the physical space reflected an internal transformation. I was no longer Callie Thompson, wife of prominent attorney Harold Thompson. I was simply Callie, a woman discovering who she was and what she wanted at 68 years old. Rebuilding my relationship with James became a central focus. The dual betrayal by his father and wife had created a unique bond between us, but also a shared trauma that needed healing. We established a new tradition of Thursday night dinners, just the two of us creating new memories to replace the painful ones of our previous family gatherings. During one such dinner about 8 months after the divorce, James shared news that signaled his own healing had begun. "I started seeing someone," he said cautiously. "A public defender I work with occasionally. We are taking things very slowly." "Tell me about her," I encouraged, genuinely happy to see this sign of my son moving forward. "Her name is Diana. She specializes in juvenile defense. She knows about what happened with Amanda and Dad," he added. I wanted to be completely honest from the beginning. "That sounds wise," I said. "And how did she respond?" "She said everyone has baggage by our age. The important thing is how we carry it." His smile, the first genuine one I had seen in months, warmed my heart. James's gradual return to happiness inspired my own. If he could trust again after such profound betrayal, perhaps I could also open myself to new possibilities. Not necessarily romantic relationships, but deeper friendships and new experiences that I had never considered during my married life. I joined a photography club, something I had always wanted to explore, but Harold had dismissed as a tourist hobby. Under the guidance of a retired professional photographer, I learned to see the world through a different lens, capturing moments of beauty in everyday scenes. My first exhibition at a small community gallery was attended by a dozen new friends I had made through various activities. Volunteering became another source of healing. I began working at a women's shelter, initially helping with administrative tasks, but eventually counseling women going through divorces. My own experience, while painful, gave me insight and empathy that the women responded to. Many were facing financial insecurity and legal complexities, similar to what I had navigated, though, often with fewer resources. The shelter director, learning of my background in real estate, asked if I would help residents find affordable housing. This evolved into a part-time consulting role that gave me purpose and connection. Using my knowledge of the Boston housing market and my network of contacts, I was able to help several women transition from the shelter to permanent homes. Through this work, I met Eleanor, a retired English professor who volunteered teaching literacy classes at the shelter. Our shared love of literature led to joining a book club together, expanding my social circle further. The monthly discussions often continued long after the designated end time, with conversations about books evolving into deep sharing about life experiences. Harold's continued presence in Boston created occasional awkward encounters. I saw him once at a restaurant with a woman significantly younger than me, though not as young as Amanda had been. Our eyes met briefly across the room, his quickly dropping in what appeared to be shame. I felt a momentary twist of something not quite jealousy, but perhaps a fleeting sadness for what might have been had he made different choices. Reports of his decline continued to reach me through mutual acquaintances. The financial settlement had forced him to significantly downsize his lifestyle. Health problems emerged, exacerbated by stress, and according to rumors, increased drinking. His law firm had asked him to retire fully after clients began requesting other attorneys uncomfortable with the publicity surrounding his personal life. As for Amanda, she had moved to Chicago after her divorce from James was finalized. Through social media, I occasionally glimpsed her new life, carefully curated images that showed a smiling woman seemingly untroubled by the wake of destruction she had left behind. I felt no animosity toward her anymore. Just a distant pity for someone who had sacrificed authentic relationships for momentary desire. 18 months after the divorce, I received an unexpected call from Harold's sister, Catherine, with whom I had maintained occasional contact. Harold had suffered a more serious heart attack and was again in Massachusetts General Hospital. "He is asking for you, Callie," Catherine said. "I told him you probably would not come, but he insisted I call." After considerable thought, I visited Harold in the hospital. The man in the bed looked diminished, his formerly commanding presence reduced to a fragile vulnerability. Our conversation was stilted at first, but gradually relaxed into something approaching the comfortable exchanges of our early years together. "I was a fool, Callie," he said as I prepared to leave. "I threw away everything that mattered for nothing. I understand now why you cannot forgive me, but I wanted you to know that I finally understand what I lost." "I do forgive you, Harold," I replied, surprising myself with the truth of the words. "Not for your sake, but for mine. Carrying anger would only burden my new life." But forgiveness does not mean forgetting or returning to the past. We both need to move forward separately. He nodded, seeming to accept this limited peace offering. As I walked out of his hospital room, I felt the last chains of resentment loosening. The betrayal would always be part of my story, but it would no longer be the defining chapter. That evening, I sat in my transformed living room, sunlight streaming through windows that once held heavy drapes Harold had insisted upon. A canvas stood on an easel by the window, my latest painting, attempting to capture the quality of light on the Charles River at sunset. As I added touches of gold to the water's surface, I realized how far I had come from the devastated woman who had discovered those text messages 2 years earlier. The journey of healing had not been linear. There were still days when grief ambushed me, when I questioned how I could have been so blind to the reality of my marriage. But these moments grew fewer, overtaken by gratitude for the new life I was creating, for the authentic relationships I now enjoyed, for the freedom to discover who Callie really was beyond the roles of wife and mother. I had learned that healing does not mean erasing the pain or forgetting the betrayal. It means integrating these experiences into a larger life story, one where they inform but do not define your identity. The scars remain, but they become evidence of survival rather than open wounds. Most importantly, I had discovered my own strength, a resilience I never knew I possessed until it was tested by betrayal. The woman who had once deferred to her husband's judgment in all things financial had successfully navigated a complex divorce and secured her future. The woman who had defined herself primarily as Harold's wife had created an independent identity filled with meaningful work, creative pursuits, and genuine friendships. The betrayal that had seemed like an ending had become unexpectedly a beginning. At 70, I was finally fully alive, fully myself in ways I had never imagined possible. There was grief in that realization for the years spent living a more limited existence, but also profound gratitude for the awakening, however painfully it had come about. Life continues to unfold in unexpected ways. James and Diana are now engaged, planning a small ceremony for next spring. Harold has moved to Florida to live near his sister, his health somewhat improved, but his spirit diminished. I have been seeing more of my neighbor, Edward, a widower whose kindness and humor have brought a new brightness to my days. Whether our friendship develops into something more remains to be seen, but I am open to possibilities in a way I never could have imagined 2 years ago. What I know with certainty is this betrayal does not have to destroy you. It can break you open to new ways of being, new understandings of yourself, and your capacity for resilience. The greatest revenge is not in causing pain to those who hurt you, but in creating a life so full and authentic that the betrayal becomes merely one chapter in a much larger, richer story. If you are watching this and going through something similar, know that there is life after betrayal, and it can be beautiful in ways you cannot yet imagine. Take each day as it comes, surround yourself with supportive people, and be gentle with yourself as you heal. The road may not be easy, but I promise you, it leads to places worth going. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you in any way, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that survival is possible. I would love to read in the comments about your own journeys of healing and transformation. How have you moved forward after betrayal? What helped you find strength when you thought all was lost? Your story matters too, and sharing it might be the light someone else needs right now. Until next time, this is Callie wishing you peace and the courage to create the life you deserve.